Hello. I slept in today. Didn't get my nap yesterday and then had people over and it was a long day. Oh. So, we're in Genesis chapter 4. And we're going to finish up chapter 4 today. I feel very confident of that. In verse 16 it says, Then Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. Now, up from the pulpit, I can see all of you guys. And there's a few of you who visit the land of Nod every now and then during a long sermon. Maybe Sunday nights. You see them. You do that one. Kind of get that whiplash effect. It's a different Nod, though. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch, and he built a city and called after the name of his son Enoch. Now, couple things. Who did Cain marry? His sister. Good. Now that we got that out of the way. So at this point, incest is not something that God has forbidden. And a few thoughts and a few things. If Cain or Seth was born, which we'll get to the very end here, when Adam was 120 years old. So it makes you wonder if Cain was born when Adam and Eve were 2 years old. I mean, that's they would technically be 2 years old, right? So you have to just wonder how many kids are in between. You have to wonder how many children in general they were having. And so you could be marrying your sister or your brother, and they could be a 40 or 50-year age difference. Physically, I don't think with the way ages worked back then, it wouldn't have looked like that, but you might have not even been very familiar with them. But that said, Adam and Eve were also handcrafted by God. So their DNA was perfect. And so therefore, there's no fear or worry about genetic problems, which is really the primary reason that incest is forbidden, is because of the fact that it creates medical problems due to genetics. They had perfect genetics, though, so there was nothing to fear. And so it wasn't until later that God then passes the laws against incest and marrying relatives who are close to you. Henry Morris was a great teacher, and Genesis and the Genesis record being one of his greatest books. In there, he made the comment he was going on of people had 6 kids every 80 years, so he was being very generous. That if you look at Adam and Eve populating the earth after, what do I have written down here? Even after 4 years, or no, 400 years. Remember, they all lived like to 800 something. So after 400 years, the population of the earth would have been about 120,000 people. And by the time of the flood, the population of the earth could have been around 7 billion. Interesting that today's population is about the same. So this is right around the population that it would have been in the time of the flood. And it just makes you think to the words of Jesus, where as in the days of Noah, so too will be the coming of the Son of Man. And so it's fascinating stuff. Fascinating stuff. So he was building a city, and he named after his son Enoch. Now we're going to start seeing already multiple people with the same names. Okay, and so let's not get this confused. There's going to be another Enoch, a very special Enoch, coming up probably tomorrow. And this is a different Enoch. This is of this descendant of Cain, not the descendant of Seth. And to him was born Irad, and Irad begot Mahujael, Mahujael begot Methushael, Methushael begot Lamech. And so here we have all these kids. And just for what it's worth, like Mahujael is God gives life. Methushael is like kind of like God's man. And so there's some godly names in here. this would lead us to believe that Cain obviously taught his kids something. And there's nothing to say that Cain never repented. There's no scripture saying how he lived his life. All we have is this. And so really the only information we have about Cain after he was kicked out was that he obviously raised some kids. And the first was named Enoch, which means a trainer to teach. So maybe he decided he would train and teach that kid to be better than he was. And Enoch names his next kid, this kid Irad. It means like a townsman. And so interesting that we might see what is the developing of cities. You don't name your kid townsman if there are no towns, right? But then, and again, God gives life, God's man. And so here are these names now that have godly meanings behind them. So who knows if Cain repented? And then Lamech, though, took for himself 2 wives. So here we see the beginning of bigamy or polygamy. And the name of one was Ada, and the name of the other was Zillah, which is ornament and shade, Ada and Zillah. And Ada bore a son, Jabal, and he was the father of those who dwell in tents and had livestock. So Jabal means wanderer, and they're the ones who've got the tents. His brother's name was Jubal, which means sound, and he was the father of all those who play the harp and the flute. And as for Zillah, she also bore Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every craftsman in bronze and iron. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah, which means pleasant. Now, we have ironworking now. So this goes against, a lot of the teachings and whatnot about the Iron Age and when did these things come about. And so it seems as if the people before the flood, the antediluvian fathers, you might call them, before the deluge or the flood came, that they got pretty advanced in technology before the flood. And the problem is we might forget, is that the flood didn't just wipe out people. The flood wiped out knowledge, and the flood wiped out technology. I didn't think they had cell phones and cars, but as they were starting with nothing, sometimes we look back in time at ancient civilizations and somehow they're thought of as less intelligent. It's like, no, they had access to less technology, but they probably were no less intelligent. We like to promote that caveman mentality, that these people were just, ruthless savages and had no thought, they knocking their wife on the head and dragging her back to the cave or whatever. And it's like, no, they just had access to limited technology. And if all of us who are watching this right now, right, literally had every bit of man-made stuff taken away, and we were shipped off to live in the jungle or the woods, what could we do? Does anyone know how to smelt iron? Or I don't know. It's like, where do we start trying to rebuild society? And so when the flood came, it was going to wipe all that stuff out. But there was obviously advanced technology. And every now and then there's been some archaeological finds of this ancient metal hammer I remember seeing where there was inside of a lump of coal. They're trying to explain that one. Now, Lamech, verse 23, said to his wives, this is called the Song of the Sword, is a title for this little thing. It says, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice. Wives of Lamech, listen to my speech. For I have killed a man for wounding me, even a young man for hurting me. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77-fold. So, this becomes kind of a poetic thing of 7 versus 7 times 7 or 77. It's just showing the greater number that we're used to seeing. But this also shows where mankind is headed now. Left to ourselves, we don't want to make even. We want revenge. And that means more, right? The, what's it called? Lexus Talanis or whatever, the eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. The idea behind that was that an eye could be taken for an eye, but you can't take 2 eyes for an eye. A tooth could be taken for a tooth, you can't have all their teeth. And that's what we would like to do. And that's what Lamech's singing about here, is that how, well, I was offended, so I killed him. And if someone, if Cain was going to be avenged sevenfold, then me 77-fold. And it just shows the heart of man, that we don't want to get even. We want to get our revenge, which usually means doing more to the other person than what happened to us. But there's hope. It says in verse 25 that Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and named him Seth. For God has appointed, that's what Seth means, another seed for me instead of Abel, whom Cain killed. As for Seth, to him his son was born, his name was Enosh. And then men began to call on the name of the Lord. So, men began to call on the name of the Lord. And it shows that there was still hope. There were still people seeking after the Lord, even though the rest of the world started on a downward spiral. And by the time of the flood, the whole world was wicked. And that's kind of where we are today, is that much of the world is on a downward spiral. But there are still those who are calling on the name of the Lord. And so it's important for us, those of us who are calling on the name of the Lord, to gather together, to encourage one another, to be near one another so that we can rub off on each other. That's the kind of stuff that keeps us going in the dark times in which we live. And really it is. It's as you look at the history of the world, and even more specifically the history of America, quite often we have these great dips in morality followed by revival. And we're at a point right now where it's hard to say, is it going to be revival, or is God going to pull the plug and put an end to this thing? Either way, let us be ready for whatever God has coming. Let's call on the name of the Lord and let's put our faith in him. There is the rest of Genesis 4. Genesis 5 tomorrow. A few of you know what special treats lay in store for us in Genesis 5, so I'm excited to jump in there and check it out. God bless you guys. Have an amazing day, and I'll see you all around.